Welcome to the Risk Management Basic Training for Extension Volunteers. My name is Kathy Howland, and I am a 4-H Extension agent as well as Unit Coordinator in the Powhatan County office. We're glad you're joining us, and if you're joining us, you are probably most likely a volunteer with the Powhatan or Goochland Extension office, whether you're working with youth, 4-H volunteers, master food volunteers, you may be a master gardener, or you may be a beekeeper in our local beekeepers association. Whatever your role is, it's important for you to learn the risk management policies of Virginia Cooperative Extension and just make sure you're following these suggestions we're going to provide through this presentation. So first off, what is risk management? You know, risk management is the process through which you plan in advance to deal with problems. We don't want to wait until a problem occurs to try to fix it really quickly. We want to plan ahead. We want to make sure that we've got our risk management plan in order so that we're not surprised at the last minute. We are going to cover risk management in the policies and activities we have in order to deal with the possibility of some future event causing harm. We are talking about risk management to protect ourselves, as myself as a staff member, you as a volunteer, our sponsors, and our program participants. We're all important, and we want to make sure that we all participate in our program safely. And here are the objectives for this training. You may see working with youth and think, oh, I'm not going to be working with youth. I'm not a 4-H volunteer. But you never know. You may participate in a program that there will be youth in attendance. And we just want to incorporate that as well into the training. It's very short and very common sense too. So you'll be fine. So there are requirements for liability insurance for Virginia Cooperative Extension, our volunteers and our staff. As a volunteer for the Commonwealth of Virginia, you have liability insurance through the Virginia Division of Risk Management, but you must meet all the qualifications. That means you have to be enrolled as a Virginia Cooperative Extension volunteer. This includes completing the registration or the enrollment, whether it's online or paper form, completing a background check, an interview, and references. Typically, most of those will be done with either an extension agent or a volunteer coordinator in the office. Activities must be approved. So there's a process for developing programs through extension and offering them to the public. There is a process. So, you know, if it's like, for instance, any programs that are done with youth, anyone between the ages of 5 and 18 must be approved by the 4-H agent in that county or that unit or that city, whatever, wherever you may be. So we're going to go over some risk management terms: liability, prudent, and negligence. There are 4 elements that I'm going to cover coming up, and you're going to see these mentioned in all of those. So I'm going to give you a second to kind of read through these. But and when you see MG volunteers, that is master gardener, but that doesn't mean it's just master gardener volunteers. That's any of our volunteers are included in it. So the elements of liability: how can you avoid being negligent? So the policy says all 4 elements of liability must be present in the situation. But what does that mean? When someone claims that you are liable for incident or accident, what does that mean? It means that there are grounds for a claim because all 4 of the following elements are present in a particular situation. I think as we go through these, you'll see that it's not so easy for someone to make this claim. Now we're going to go through 4. Think about how some simple documentation can even negate these elements. So element 1 is the existence of legal duty. When you volunteer to work with individuals, say in a horticulture program, a nutrition cooking program, a youth development program, you're assuming legal duty. Therefore, you're expected to plan to prevent injury or accident. For example, in let's say a gardening or horticulture program. You may offer to help your extension office with a pruning workshop. You're in charge of a small group of participants for the hands-on portion. You've assumed that legal duty to protect these participants from risks that that is reasonable to assume that you could have anticipated. So if you have somebody, let's say they're using the shears to prune a bush or a tree in your small group, and you were off to the side talking to a buddy that you happen to know in the group and not really paying attention to what the participants were doing, somebody could get hurt. Maybe they cut themselves and snip the end of the finger off, something like that. If you were not there checking the position of their hands on the pruners, that's a possibility that someone could find you that you were not being reasonable and aware of the risks that were at hand there. So you have to recognize when you have a duty of care of others as well. So element 2 is a failure to perform that duty of care. So in order for you to be liable, the claimant must prove that you failed in your duty to care for that individual or that group. Let's say you've got a group of youth this time, and you all are traveling down a nature trail in rural library and walking past a nearby stream. It's been raining for several days, but it had cleared up for your walk. Several people, several of the children, maybe they got in the water and it ended up being deeper than anyone realized. Had you brought life jackets, life vests? Had you given them any warnings about not going into the water? Had they, been given any kind of risk associated with being near a creek or a body of water? We don't want to use the excuse of not knowing. That just won't help you in this kind of situation if you were taken to court. If you have a hard time anticipating situations, get help from someone who can. There are a lot of these volunteers through the Extension Office. They've been doing programs for years and years and years. They know what they're doing. We as staff, the Extension agents, can help you. If you ignore this planning and the anticipation, problems will happen. So please make sure that you are trying to think ahead and eliminate some of the possibility of these problems. So element 3 is an injury suffered by the claimant. The person who's filing the claim is the claimant. That injury could be physical, mental, or property. So obviously an injury or an accident has to occur for a claim to be made of your liability of the injury. Element 3 tells us that the injury can take several forms. And believe it or not, landscape plants are property, livestock is considered property, a fence is considered property. So, you do have to be careful when you are on other people's property, especially when you're dealing with youth and animals and for the master gardeners, that can definitely come to play with you all as well. All of our volunteers, that's something you've got to be careful. What about a beekeeper around the hive, and the bees? And did you check to make sure anyone was allergic to bee stings? If you knew they were allergic, do they have an EpiPen with them? Those are kind of things that we can eliminate the problem if we just think ahead. A reasonably close causal relationship between the breach of duty and the claimant's injury is element number 4. Now, this last element refers to the burden of proof that the claimant has to prove that what you did or you failed to do is the reason the claimant's injury took place. If the claimant's injury was to property in the form of a Japanese maple, their prized Japanese maple, and the claim was that you recommended a chemical solution for use on that prized maple, the claimant would have to prove that the chemical killed the Japanese maple. Okay, that's our 4 elements for liability. Now let's talk about ways to make sure that none of these elements can be proven. So to avoid being negligent, the big thing I would say would be records, records, records. Document your activities. It isn't what we want to spend our time doing. I get it, but it can help us bust those elements of liability. Can you imagine facing a court date on a liability case without records? It makes sense to jot down some notes while in your planning meetings or on the login sheets. And it doesn't have to be pages long. Let's see, here's an example. So there's an activity is an IPM bug club visit. You're visiting one individual whose name is on your bug club form. From what the homeowner has told the agent, there is an old dying tree with weakened limbs, that hang over the driveway. You plan to evaluate the safety aspects of the old tree, and you plan to park your vehicle on the street. You also note that the home is on the eastern end of the county. So the closest hospital might be Johnson Willis Hospital or St. Francis, the medical place at 288. You have a phone number, you will have in your documentation a phone number for the homeowner so that you know that there's a telephone available. You should have, you should need to call, if you should need to call rescue. These are the things that are almost subconscious. It just takes a minute to jot them down, the who, what, when, where, but they are the simple safety issues that we can avoid. Okay. So to evaluate the risks, I do say planning for the best and worst is the best thing to do. So in order to look out for ourselves and our clients, to anticipate risks, you'll need to imagine what's in store for you in each environment and make some notes. You should have handouts for sheets entitled risk management information, or I know with 4-H we have risk management planning sheets that help kind of plan out the risk management, like for our shooting club. We have them plan out the risk management plan prior to them starting practices each year. And part of that plan is phoning the local sheriff's department and making sure they're aware that we will be practicing on Sunday afternoons. And so if they start getting some calls about firearms, they know that it's most likely the shooting club and they're not going to be as alarmed and go in full force. These sheets can be just used as a checklist, if nothing else, for your activities. While not complete, the list of items can be considered when evaluating risk. It may just help you as you plan. Each Master Gardener project needs to have a list of hazards. When you're preparing that list, it can be on a pad of paper, it can be on note cards, whatever you're comfortable with. And if you have Master Gardener volunteers who have done the program before, maybe compare some notes, because obviously every program or activity that we do as staff or volunteers, they're not going to be the same. They're not going to have the same hazards. You know, a program working with animals, maybe a 4-H livestock club is working with livestock, obviously, or horses. They're going to have totally different risks from a beekeeper who is working with a hive and demonstrating to new beekeepers how to monitor the queen bee or whatever. I'm not an expert in that, so forgive me if I didn't do that right. But anyway, just complete all those necessary forms and make sure that you know what is in store for you when you get to the site. Use your common sense, be reasonable, prudent, and prepared. If you hear the warning bells, see the red flags, or have that funny feeling about an activity, don't do it. Stop. You know, if there's an individual kind of lurking around and you've got a group of kids, that's a warning sign. You know, make sure that you have a plan. If there are, you know, strangers coming into your program area and you had the room reserved, make sure that you have a plan of action. Make sure you have enough adults there with those youth. In the event of an accident or an incident, we do have extension accident incident forms to document everything. This is really includes the facts only. When you submit this form, you will be listing any personal injuries or accidents to participants or volunteers and any serious injuries. So you have to call 911 and they are going to the hospital. You even with all kinds of planning and preparation, an accident can still occur. We all know this. That's the definition of an accident. Minor accidents don't need reporting. It's not required. What constitutes a minor accident? On the bottom of the accident incident report, you'll see in capital letters the types of accidents that don't need to be reported. I'm talking a scrape, a scratch, something that a Band-Aid will fix. I always, when I go to a program, whether it's with adults or children, I always make sure I have a first aid kit in my car or the van. It's just a precaution and it's part of my trying to, avoid risk. And I may not put the Band-Aid on, but I can certainly hand it to that individual and have them put it on. I'm not a doctor, I'm not an EMS person, but I can call 911 if it's an injury, a serious injury. We do have an extension emergency procedures card, which has some guidelines on it. I recommend making sure that that you carry it with you all the time and you fill it out in advance. And obviously, if it's a serious life-threatening incident, you're going to call 911. Don't call your local extension agent first. You should have their number on there or on your cell phone, but call 911 and make sure that you get the professionals out there as soon as possible. And this is what the procedures card looks like. I think this is something that I can get each of you. Just call up your local extension unit and they can get a copy for you. If you don't have the local extension agent's phone numbers, please make sure you get those before you go to a program. Know and follow VCE policies. All programs conducted by Virginia Cooperative Extensions, whether we're staff or volunteers, are open to all people who wish to participate. Policies like the ones we're going over protect you and your clientele and keep things fair for everyone. Some of our volunteers do have handbooks that have policies to guide your volunteer activities. I know the master volunteer programs definitely have a large handbook. The volunteers for the youth development program, I give each of my club leaders a handbook when they first start. So the extension agent is your contact person. If you need help interpreting policies, if you've got questions that haven't been covered, they're the one to go to. So documentation, there is some paperwork you need when conducting an extension program. Obviously, we've talked about your volunteer enrollment. It has to be on file. We do a lot of those virtually now. They're in an online system, but as long as you've completed it with your local extension agent, you're good to go. Part of that includes a standards of behavior form. You have to get approved by the local staff in your extension office. You'll need a participant list or group information on those who participated in your program. You want your notes, you want an agenda, you want a lesson plan, all the other documents that you've used to plan your program or activities. And you want that emergency information. You want your risk management plan. You want all the who, what, when, where's. On the sometimes column, the 4-H enrollment forms, that's if you're working with youth. So obviously, if you only work with adult groups, that's not something you're going to need. The health and medical forms is also part of working with youth. Accident insurance. We, through the 4-H program, use a company that we get accident insurance in addition to what the families may have. Especially when we're dealing with large groups, animals, shooting sports, all of that kind of stuff. And just those general waivers, permission slips, all that good stuff. And we do have participant lists. We sign kids in and out when we are working with youth as well. Bloodborne pathogens. This is becoming more and more common knowledge, especially those who work with youth. Probably some of you have, and I've already been trained in bloodborne pathogens. The main definition of a bloodborne pathogen, it's an infectious agent that's carried in our blood or other bodily fluids. So as you can see, there are multiple ways of exposure of bloodborne pathogens, whether it's contact with potentially infectious bodily fluids through inhalation, needle sticks, or other contact with open wounds, broken skin, eyes, or mucous membranes. And remember, contact with blood or bodily fluids onto intact skin does not signify an exposure. As I mentioned before, keep that first aid kit with you at all times. You should have latex-free gloves with you in your first aid kit. This is just protecting you if you were to have to handle someone who maybe got hurt and you're going to come in contact with bodily fluids of any kind. Put those gloves on. If you don't have gloves, make sure you've washed your hands really, really good, or wherever you were exposed on your skin, to make sure you're washing really good as soon as you take off those gloves. Okay, and so I'll let you read the rest of this, but you know, there are. So if you would like more details on the Virginia Cooperative Extension risk management policies, we have a website specifically for risk management and volunteers with extension. So I'll give you a second to type that in, write that down. Now we're going to move on to working with youth. For this particular, I did this program recently with the Master Gardeners, and that's why it has Master Gardener volunteers specifically. But as I've said previously, these policies are for any volunteer who works with youth. I want to just give you a little quick background on what a 4-H extension agent, what their role is in extension. We are faculty members of Virginia Tech, and we basically coordinate the youth component of the extension work. So the 4-H Youth Development Program is the youth arm of extension. Besides agriculture and natural resources and family consumer sciences, we also have the 4-H Youth Development Program. The major responsibilities for an agent in my area of expertise, we coordinate the programs, the educational programs for children, youth, teens, ages 5 to 18. So we don't work with youth under the age of 5 or adults, basically. But we recruit, we train, we manage all the volunteers who work with the youth. We promote our programs in our community to make sure that everyone in our community has an understanding of what 4-H programs are offered. And we can really help when you are doing a program that you'd like to try something different or something new that you haven't done before and offer a program for children or youth. That's our job. We do that all the time. And so please come to us for help. So I kind of answered a little bit of this already, but we do have a diverse set of curriculum, delivery modes, and participants. For 4-H youth, we have an online enrollment system for them, and they must complete 6 or more hours of educational programming to be enrolled in the program. So if we're only doing an hour program, we may count those contacts, that's something that all volunteers collect. It's a requirement of the state that we know the gender and the ethnicity of those who we're working with, our audience groups. Here's the mission of 4-H. Hopefully some of you are familiar with 4-H and maybe we're a participant of 4-H alumni at this point. That would be great, and you probably have a better understanding, but 4-H has been around over 100 years in the United States, and elsewhere it's actually in other countries now, and it's really spreading. It's spread all over the country. But we encourage the youth and the adults that work with the youth to gain life skills and attitudes that they will take with them as they grow into adults and move into society. The 4-H's stand for head, heart, hands, and health. And that logo is very recognizable even today. It's been around a long time and has not changed. They've definitely got their brand, and people recognize them, and we're proud of it. There are age divisions for Virginia 4-H youth. For membership in a club, youth have to be 9 and above. They have specific individual projects they do. They can run for offices. They compete in contests, in shows, competitions, things like that. Youth that are 5 to 8-year-old are considered cloverbuds. They can join Cloverbud Club with youth their own age, but we typically don't have individual projects for them. They don't elect officers, and they don't compete within the Cloverbud division. Youth under the age of 5 do not compete or do not participate in 4-H. So we have multiple delivery modes. In each community in Virginia, you'll see very different 4-H programs. Depending on how the 4-H program is set up and what the needs are of the community, you'll see very different. Some in-school 4-H clubs are in some counties and cities, but like in Powhatan, it's not something that's been done here for ever and ever and ever for a long time. Now, I may do school enrichment programs. I'll go in and we will get incubators set up in schools and do embryology programs to hatch chicks. But, very specific programs that I work with the teachers and the students on, but we don't do clubs in the schools. We have clubs that meet after school or outside of school in Powhatan, and they're considered either a community club or project club. We also have short-term clubs, which are called spin clubs. We're always looking for volunteers who have a hobby or a talent that they want to teach youth. This is a great way to do that. The kids meet 5-6 times and they learn about a very specific something that interests them. Maybe beekeeping, maybe gardening, something like that. And then we also have 4-H camps. We do day camps, but our big one that 4-H is very proud of is our residential week-long camps. We have 6 4-H centers across the state and 4-H camps. Youth 9 to 13 go to these camps, and we work with teen counselors in our communities, training them to prepare to go to camp and work with the campers. And then Lone Star membership is for a more individualized program. Reporting to 4-H, extension counts youth programming. So, the master gardeners count how many participants are in their programs. Same goes with 4-H. We count how many youth are in our program. So if you do a program with youth, say you're a beekeeper, we still want you to keep those counts of how many youth you talk to. Usually it's easiest to get especially if we're working in a school setting, the schools can supply us with the breakdown of gender and ethnicity. 4-H reporting is easy. We have enrollment forms that you fill out and you can give to the 4-H agent. We must be aware, I think I talked about that a little bit before, that we must be aware of all youth programs or projects that you're doing with our youth. And their number of hours is not required by the 4-H program. You don't need to report that to us. And you don't have to just work with 4-H youth. You can do a short-term educational activity with other youth, but you do have to have certain things done to justify this. They are done in accordance with extension policy. The 4-H agent must be aware of the activity that you're doing, and volunteers need to have had basic training in risk management, which you're doing now and working with youth. But I have curriculum I can share with you. I know that the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts clubs often ask our volunteers to come and work with the Scouts on a specific event or something like that. That's fine, not a problem. You don't have to just work with youth enrolled in 4-H, but I still need to know that you're doing that as the 4-H agent. Above suspicion policy. This is something that anyone working with youth in this day and age needs to be aware of. This is the policy is basically to be avoiding any kind of a situation where you could be accused of child abuse. So when working with a group of children, you must have at least 2 adults present at the time. You want to avoid being alone with someone else's child in a one-on-one situation, and avoid and anticipate scenarios to avoid problems. So when you're working with a group of children, if you only had 1 adult, let's give an example. Say you're in a group and you're at the library in a conference room and you're working with the kids. There's just 1 adult there. Maybe there was another adult and she had to slip out for 30 minutes, go pick up a child. Well, what happens when you've got to go to take a group of kids to the bathroom? Is it safe for those kids to be alone, whether they're in the room by themselves or a group of children to just, okay, go to the restrooms by yourself? It's probably not the safest setting. What you want to have at least 1 adult anytime you're with a group of kids. Say you're taking a group of children to the restroom. I don't go into the bathroom. I'd wait outside the bathrooms, boys and girls, whoever, they go into whichever bathroom they go to. You don't need to go in there with them. You don't want to put yourself in that kind of situation. And when we anticipate, these kind of scenarios and how to avoid these problems, that's something, truly that we need to anticipate. If you have children leaving the program, and of course the adults need to wait until all the children have been picked up. If you are the only adult and all the kids but 1 have been picked up, you're standing there with this 1 child by yourself, not a situation you want to be in. So how could you anticipate that scenario and avoid it? By having that second adult with you, you've got 3 people. By asking another parent and their child to wait until the last child leaves would be a situation if you found yourself in that situation. But it's best to plan ahead and make sure you have plenty of adults that you can have plenty of coverage in that situation, because you just never want to have that one-on-one situation with a child. Okay. Other policies, some of these we've gone over. If you are taking pictures in a program that you're doing and planning on posting them to social media or sending them to the local newspaper or putting them in your Master Gardener newsletter, check with the 4-H agent. They have to have a media release on record before you use any pictures, before you take any pictures. That's a no-no. We as adults, whether you're an adult, your staff, we need to set good examples for the youth at all times. That includes our language and our actions. Use of alcohol and drugs during extension activities is prohibited for volunteers and participants. I know that some of our volunteers often set up a booth at the local wine festival in the fall in Powhatan. It's important that once you finish your volunteer gig and maybe you have an extension Master Gardener shirt on, do you want to go out and start sampling wine with that shirt on? No, we want to make sure that we are separating the 2. You're on the clock, you're not as a volunteer. No physical or emotional disciplinary measures may be used with youth in extension programs. suspicion of child abuse. By law, anyone who works with children and suspects abuse or neglect has a legal responsibility to report it. If you don't have the number in front of you, you can call the local social services number where the child lives or where the abuse occurred. Contact your extension agent, your 4-H extension agent, if you can't get in touch with social services. Suspicious defined as reasonable cause to believe that individual has been abused or neglected. We don't want you to confront anyone. We don't want you to accuse anyone. That's super important to make sure that you are being professional no matter the situation. We want to keep things confidential. We don't want to go telling every other volunteer or staff member in the program what's happened. It's got to be something confidential. We don't want everyone knowing. We don't want the children knowing that you suspect something. Oftentimes when we work with kids, if they're comfortable with us as adults, they may admit something or they may say something that makes you suspicious, but we are not the professionals to determine if that's right or wrong. You know, the appropriate official folks need to be the ones making those difficult decisions. So that's it for me. I hope that you have learned a little bit more about risk management as it happens with Virginia Cooperative Extension. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact your local 4-H extension agent if you work with youth, or your A&R agents in the extension offices. We all are here to help you and guide you and make sure you are successful in whatever programming you are doing. We appreciate you listening to the recording. Thank you.